Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So today I want to convert my mountain bike to a tubeless tire system. So we'll go through the entire process, how to basically get the sealant in, how to seat the new tires, and everything that's going to be needed. So if you're interested in the step-by-step process of how to do that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so my bike, as it came from the factory, the tires are actually using inner tubes, but the tires are tubeless compatible. So in fact, if you take a look here, right, so I've got these dissectors and they are, as you can see right here, tubeless ready. So all we need to do is basically remove the inner tube and get the tubeless sealant in there, and we should basically be ready to go. There's obviously a couple other steps that we'll go through, but what I wanted to show right now is the very first thing you probably want to do is make a note of which one is your front tire and which is your rear tire. And I know that might sound a little silly, but for some bikes, for example mine, the tire is actually slightly different. So for example, on the rear, you see I've got this, it's a 29 by 2.4 tire. But then in the front, it is the exact, it's pretty much a similar tire, and it's a 29 by 2.5. So it could be fairly easy to get those mixed up. So I'm going to make a note of which one is which. That's step number one. And then step number two is, as you can kind of see, the bike is pretty dirty and the tires are also pretty dirty because I've been riding this. So the next thing we're going to do is let's remove the front and the rear wheel set from the bike and clean this up a little bit. All right, so in case it's helpful, I'll maybe just show how I take these wheels off. So these are through axles, not quick releases. So with the through axles, right, at least for this front one on this RockShox, I'll just kind of undo the lever and then lock it into this little notch here in the through axle, and then just start turning counterclockwise, and you'll be able to unscrew this all the way, and then you should be able to just pull the through axle out, and now the front wheel should just drop out like such. So there we go. Let's go set this off to the side and get him cleaned up, and let me show you how to take off the rear through axle. All right, so for the rear through axle, you come over here and you might be tempted to look on the right side of your bike, and yours may be different, but mine here has this nut, which is actually what the through axle is interfacing with, and it actually has this kind of confusing notation where it says to loosen, you actually turn clockwise, and to tighten, you turn counterclockwise. So this is a reverse thread, so you might be tempted to come in here with the 6mm Allen and start monkeying with this to try to get your through axle loose. But don't do that, right? This is not what we want to be playing with, right? This is not the Allen that you're looking for, right? Instead, the Allen we're looking for is on the other side, on the left side of the bike, down here. Okay, so here's the through axle interface. So again, grab your 6mm Allen in this case. It doesn't have a latch. Insert that in as far as it will go, and now just loosen this counterclockwise like a standard thread. Okay, so just same thing, loosen this all the way and then pull out the through axle, and then we're gonna have to monkey around with the derailleur a little bit to get the rear wheel to drop out cleanly, but I think you can do that probably no problem. All right, so these tires are pretty nasty, so I'm gonna try to clean these off as best as I can, and I think this will pay dividends in some of the future steps. So I'm gonna clean these off and I'll be back in just a second. All right, so we've got these cleaned up a bit. So next we need to get the tire off the rim. So I'll take the inner tube here and obviously just deflate it. And then once I got the air out, I'll bust out some tire forks and let's get this tire off the rim. All right, so I'm getting this off of some of the tire forks. And now let's actually, we can pull out the inner tube now. Okay, get the inner tube out. Okay, so that's what we're basically going to be replacing. And now what we're actually going to want to do is let's get the entire tire off of the rim, because we also are now going to need to remove this old rim tape. So let's go ahead and remove all of this. All right, so to get this rim tape off, you basically just need to find where it ends and just kind of carefully peel it up a little bit. And then all we're going to do is just kind of carefully remove this, and I'm going to try to remove this as gently as possible and to pick up as much residue. I don't want any of this tape residue stuck to the rim because we're going to have to eventually clean that off as well. So give me a second to peel all of this tape off. All right, so now that we've got that old rim tape removed, I wanted to point out on this tire, or this wheel, it actually already has this WTB solid strip installed. So this covers a lot of these spoke holes, and actually what this is designed to do, it's specifically made so that rim tape, the tubeless rim tape, will not sag into the spoke holes. So long story short, do not remove this. You want to keep this thing on because it's designed to be used with the tubeless rim tape. So now that we're going to leave that on, I think the next thing we want to do is let's see if we can clean this up a bit. All right, so we really want a nice clean surface on the inside of the rim so the rim tape will have a nice good seal. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of rubbing alcohol here, and I am just going to, whoopsie, that was quite a lot, but I'm just going to rub this thing down and make sure that this is nice, clean, and free of any goop. All right, so I think we've got that all cleaned off, not just on the surface that the rim tape is going to adhere to, but I've also tried to clean on the inside of the sidewall on both sides as well. Basically just any interface where the bead of the tire or the rim tape is going to eventually have to interface with. I really wanted to clean that off. So also in the interest of making sure that the seal between the rim tape and the rim is nice and solid, let's go sit this out somewhere in a dry place, and I'm just going to let this dry for a couple of days just to make sure that all of the the water and the rubbing alcohol and whatever else is completely dry, so we can have as clean an interface and seal as possible. So I'll go set this off aside, let it dry for a few days, and now let's just go repeat that same process for the rear wheel. All right, while we're waiting for all that to dry, I'm actually kind of curious in terms of how much weight we're going to save by converting to tubeless. So I'm going to take the old inner tube and let's weigh this thing and see how much the old inner tube weighs. All right, let me see if I can get this all to sit on the scale cleanly. Oh boy, this is going to be a little bit tricky. But basically, right, with the tubeless system, we are effectively replacing this inner tube with a bunch of sealant. Okay, 233 grams. And then I guess this rim tape, technically we are also going to replace this. So let's see how much is this rim tape. Okay, 243 grams. So the whole setup that I think we are going to be replacing is 243 grams. This is what it used to weigh. So we're going to have to see how much is the tubeless sealant, as well as the tubeless tape, which is going to replace this, as well as the valve stem and the valve cores for the tubeless system. So if it comes in less than 243 grams, we're basically saving some weight by converting to tubeless. So actually, you know what? This might be a good time to go and talk about the tubeless conversion kit that I got that has all the supplies that are needed for this conversion process. All right, so the next thing we're going to need is obviously the components to switch over the tires to tubeless. So I ended up just going with an entire kit. So this here is an Orange Seal, basically tubeless conversion kit. And as you can see, it comes with a whole bunch of things. The first thing that's probably most important is the tubeless sealant. So you get 8 ounces of the sealant, which is enough to do 2 tires. You get 1 set of rim tape, which is 24 millimeters wide by 12 yards long. So again, that should do 2 tires. You get 2 valve stems, 48 millimeters long, 2 valve cores, and 1 valve core removal tool. I don't know why they call this an RVC tool, but that's what it is. And you get a couple of grommets. So this whole package comes with all the components you need, as well as some instructions on the back. I ended up getting this thing for about $57, I think is what REI wanted for this, which, you know, initially that might sound like a lot, but if you start looking at the individual components, buying them all one at a time and piecemeal, maybe from different manufacturers, and sticking it all together, it comes out to about that amount. So I think this is probably reasonable. Just get everything all in one-stop shop. So let's dump this out and see what comes with it. So all right, here is the sealant. Okay, so this is the Orange Seal regular sealant. So again, Orange Seal, they make 2 different kinds of sealant, the regular and the endurance. So this is the regular version. So we get 8 ounces of that. Also coming with it is, I believe this is kind of a injection system. So I think you can get this in if you want to inject the sealant in via the an existing valve stem. So you just remove the core and you can pump this into a tire. If you've already got the tire set up tubeless, you can do this. Since we're going to be installing it brand new, I think we can just probably pour it off directly into it, so we probably won't need this component, but at least it's nice that this is included if that's what you're doing. Here you go, you got the rim tape, and then here's all of our gadgets and other hardware components. So let's go ahead and take a look. So you get your 2 Presta valve stems with the valve cores already installed. So let me just go and unscrew that so we can take a look at it all together. All right, so you got the valve stems and cores. Yep, there we go. 2 of them. That looks great. Oh, okay, that's kind of nice. You get an alcohol prep pad, so that'll help clean up the tire and get it ready for usage. And then we got all of our little components here, the grommets. Oh, that's interesting. You actually get some extra valve cores, so that's interesting. There are already 2 valve cores in those 2 valve stems, but it looks like you get 2 spares, so that's actually nice. Okay, and then you got some of these other bits and bobs that will hopefully help out, and we'll leverage those later. Oopsies, oh, well, there's more. Sorry, haha. I just dropped a whole bunch of these. So luckily they're all color-coded, so I think we'll be able to keep them all straight and together. So here's all of the bits and bobs that also come along with the kit. And you get some stickers. And whoopsie, let me turn that over so you can see them. You get some stickers to go with the kit, I guess. And then you've got some other instructions here on how to get all of these bits and bobs, the nuts and all of these different O-rings and everything put together. So that's actually quite handy. All right, so that's the entire contents of the kit. So let's go ahead and see if we can bring this over to the bike and start the conversion. And here's a little trick. Now that you've got the inner tubes out of your old tire, don't just throw these inner tubes away. You still probably want to carry an inner tube with you. At least I personally do on longer rides where I'm worried that if I do encounter a puncture on my tubeless tire that is too big for the tubeless sealant to basically fix on the trail, it's still a nice thing to have an inner tube as a spare backup. So I take my old inner tubes that I just took out, and what I'm going to usually do is I like to wrap them up in a little bit of saran wrap just to keep them safe. And now you can throw this in your pack as a backup. So again, save your old inner tubes. They should be totally fine, right? And basically you can use them for emergency trail repair if you need it. All right, so I think I've let these dry out long enough. So the next part is to add the rim tape and apply it to the rim to seal it up. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting for my application. So remember, the kit that I bought comes with rim tape, but this rim tape is only 24 millimeters wide. This rim is about 30 millimeters wide from the inside of this sidewall to that inside of the sidewall. So as such, the rim tape is not quite wide enough to go edge to edge, right? From the interior sidewall to the other interior sidewall. So some people say that, you definitely want to make sure that it is side to side completely. Some people say all you really need to do is cover the spoke holes. The reason why you may want to consider making sure that the rim tape goes all the way sidewall to sidewall is, for example, let me see, I'll pull up this other wheel, and I've seated I've put the tire on, and I don't know if you can see this easily, but as you can, I'm trying to show right here, you can see that the bead of the tire gets really close, in fact almost touches the rim. So if you have rim tape which is from sidewall to sidewall, you'll see that the rim tape will be sandwiched between the tire and the rim, and therefore it will kind of help with the seal, as well as the tire will help hold the rim tape down so you won't have sort of an exposed edge, right? And in fact, instead of me trying to show you this, maybe I'll flash up a screenshot over here on the side of a manufacturers, and they show some of the cross section and the geometry, and you can kind I'm talking about there, where you can see that if the rim tape is butted up against the sidewall, the tire will be pinching the rim tape, right? It'll be sandwiched between the tire and the rim, and it will hopefully seal and hold a little bit better, and sealant won't work its way into some of these exposed edges. Now, I can't do that. In fact, I actually called 3 different bike shops to try to get my hands on some wider rim tape so I would be able to do that. But since I can't, what I'm going to end up doing is, let's go ahead and run 1 layer of rim tape, which is butted up against this sidewall. We'll go all the way around, and then I'll shift and do another layer of rim tape, which is also butted up against the opposite side of the rim. So at least what will happen there is we'll have rim tape between the tire bead and the rim, but we will still have that exposed edge. So I think this is kind of one of these trade-offs that we got to make, because I can't get my hands on the proper size rim tape. But I think it should be fine. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start taping this guy up using this scheme. All right, so to start the taping job, I'm going to go ahead and find the valve hole right here, and I'm going to start the taping a good distance away from this valve hole. So I'm going to start way over here. I'll go ahead and stretch out the rim tape, and as we discussed, we're going to try to butt this edge up against the sidewall. Okay, so I'm just going to try to get the one end down to start. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm going to press it down, and now I want to try to make sure that there are no bubbles as much as I can. So I'm going to pull a little bit of tape out and pull nice and tight and try to stick it down. Okay, just like that. That's looking pretty good. Okay. There we go, and I'll press it down. And as you can see, this looks like it's going to work in the sense that you can see that the tape goes from this sidewall and it covers all of the spokes, and it does adhere to the other side, but there is this big gap that we're gonna have to cover in the next pass. So all we're gonna do is let's keep going around like this, pulling out a little bit and then pulling down tight on the tape to make sure it seats nicely. And we are just gonna work our way around the entire wheel like this. All right, so we've made 1 full revolution, and now what I'm going to do, instead of actually cutting the tape, I'm going to try to just kind of direct it a little bit towards the other side if I can, and see if we can now put the tape on the opposite side of the rim, and we'll go from there. So again, we just need to kind of transfer and kind of make a small angle, and then let me see if we can get at least a little bit of this on so we can take a look, see. Okay, same thing, there we go. Okay, so now I think, there you go. So now you can see, now we've got rim tape kind of from sidewall to sidewall, but there is sort of one exposed edge, which I think we're gonna have to live with. So let's do this. Let's go around and finish up this wheel. All right, so we're all the way around. So now let's just go ahead and make sure we've got a little bit of overlap on the tape, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut this and then stick this down as much as possible. Like such. There we go. There we go. All right, and I'm going to try to work out if there's any bubbles or anything like that. Yes, I think that'll work. There's some, but I think I can kind of work them out. There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I think we've got it taped up, sidewall to sidewall. All right, so now let's go ahead and take some next steps. All right, so next what we're gonna have to do is we are gonna have to punch a hole in the tape where the valve stem is gonna eventually go through. So this is one of those situations where you wanna make sure you line it up correctly, and also get yourself something small. Like, so I've got a really small, tiny little, small diameter screwdriver, and you can always start small and make a bigger hole later, but you can't go the opposite, right? So I would start with something small and punch a little hole right here, and again, make sure you line it up correctly, and pop a little hole in the center. There we go. And then that's where the valve stem is going to go through. But actually, before we put this valve stem in, let me show you a little trick. So the trick here is eventually what we're going to want to try to do is we have to get the tire back on the rim and seat the beads on this rim, right? Now, one way you can do that is you can actually use, remember we had that old inner tube that we took out. We can use this inner tube initially to inflate and basically get these beads seated. So what we're going to do right now is let's get this tire back on the rim. So I'm just going to work it on, and now's an excellent time to also make sure you got the rotation and the orientation of this tire correct, because we're going to try to start getting ready to seat the bead. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing muscled on, and we'll be back in a second. All right, so I've got the tire loosely on one side, and now what we can do is let's get our old inner tube, okay, and get him inside. So I will poke the valve stem from the inner tube through the hole. There we are. And now let's get ready and pretend like we are going to basically use an inner tube, but all we're doing here is we're getting this ready, and we're going to use the inner tube to help us easily seat the bead, at least one of the beads on the tire. So give me a second, and then we'll be right back. All right, so I've got the tire now on the rim, and remember the inner tube is inside, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of kind of soapy water around the bead. This is going to help the bead snap into place. So I've already done it on the other side. I'm just going to kind of try to soap this side up and give it a little bit of lubrication so that when we inflate the inner tube, hopefully the bead will slide into place a little bit easier. Now, here's where the benefit of using the inner tube comes in, is because now I can actually pump this up using a normal floor pump. I don't need an air compressor or a boost charger or anything like that to try to get this thing going. So now let's just pump this up, and we will see if the bead will now seat by using the inner tube to push them out. So let's just pump this up a little bit, and we'll go from here. Aha, you hear the pop? Pop. So you hear some of these pops, so I think the bead is seating. I'm going to go up to the maximum recommended pressure, which is about 50 psi. Okay, so the tire is now pretty much fully inflated, and hopefully both sides of the bead are seated fairly well. So now what we can do is just let's let the air out, and what we're going to do is we're going to leave one side in place. We're going to dislodge the bead from one side of the rim just so we can get the inner tube out. So let's do that now. Okay, so now I'm only going to take one side off. So let's see if we can get one side of this off enough that we can get the inner tube out. So give me a second, and I'll get the inner tube out and leave the far side of the bead in place. Okay, so we got the inner tube out, so maybe the next thing we should do is get the valve stem ready. So this thing is kind of interesting, right? So the valve stem, in fact, maybe I'll show you this little diagram that they provide. This is actually really helpful. You can see that you need to have a couple of parts, right? You need to have this valve stem base, which is sort of this rubber grommet washer, which is on the inside of the tire, which is on the rim. That's that top part. Then the stem goes through the rim and sticks out the other side, and then you're gonna have to put on an O-ring and then a nut. And then what's interesting is they actually talk about this this valve core tool and that took me a little while to figure out what they were talking about. They're like, why do you have a tool on the end of your valve stem? And I'll show you what they actually mean. So again, here's the valve stem, and then what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to get the valve stem, I forgot exactly what they call this thing, yeah, the valve stem base, right? That's this little rubber grommet. So let's go and pass this through like such, okay? So this will all be on the inside. This will pass through, and then what we're going to need is we're going to need one of these little O-rings that they provide in the kit that will go like such. like that. And then you have multiple colors of these nuts. They're all the same, they're just different colors. So I'm gonna pick one that matches with most of the aesthetics of my bike, maybe this orange one, like that, okay? And then what you're gonna have is obviously the valve core. So you can put that in loosely right now. We're actually gonna take it out in a second, but I did want to point out what they meant by, you know, they give you this thing, I think they call it the RVC valve core tool. It's very odd shape, but basically what it is doing is you hold it sideways like this, and you can use this as a tool to kind of take in and out the valve core. And then what you can do with this as well is it actually threads onto the stem. So I guess if you want to carry this around on the trail with you in case you need to take this out, if you're like, if you don't have a multi-tool, like my multi-tool already has a valve core tool, so I'm not actually going to ever end up using this, but that's kind of a neat idea that they give you this little tool that you can carry around on your valve stem if you want. So anyway, that's that, and then you put obviously the cap on once you're done. So this is sort of what the assembled setup will look like. So let's take out the cap. Let's also take out the valve core. We're going to leave this out, and I'll show you why in a second. Then we're going to take off the nut, and then let's also take off the O-ring. So this now can pass in through the tape. So let's go ahead and install this on our setup right now. So we've got the inner tube out, so it's just the clean tape, and I'm going to pass this through. And again, I'm going to try to be a little bit careful to make sure I don't. There we go. Okay, that's in like such. All right, now let's get the rest of our parts. Let's get our O-ring on here, and then I'm going to push this up. I'm going to get our nut, and I'm going to screw this thing on. And you don't have to herc this thing down. I've seen some people that get pliers and nuts and get this thing wrenched on, but we just need this thing kind of roughly tight, and then we'll take our next steps. All right, so we've got the stem in, and then I rolled the tire back onto the rim, being very careful not to unseat the bead on the other side. And now you can see why we've got the valve core removed, but I've got the valve core close at hand. We're gonna need it in a second, but now I've got my air compressor because we're gonna need to try to get this now seated. And again, I'm kind of doing a dry fit in the sense that we don't have any sealant in here right now. I just wanna see if I can get this thing to seat easily. So actually, you know, one thing we should probably do is I'm gonna get a little bit more soapy water around the rim and to let this seat a little easier, and then we're going to give it a shot with the air compressor. All right, so let's see if we can get this thing seated. So I'm going to get the air compressor lined up. I gotta move this thing around. Let me orient this a little bit differently so it's not in the way of the rotor. Okay. Ha! Look at that. Did you hear that go pop, pop? That was about the easiest thing in the world. So now, you see I quickly plug this hole, right? Now, I'm going to go grab my valve core, and let's just see if we can screw it in. Okay. So that's halfway reasonable. I think I heard it pop, so I think it's already seated. Let me go ahead, and now I'm going to grab my pump, and let's see if we can top this off a little bit just to ensure that the beads are seated. Okay, so I'm going to pump this up a little more. All right, so there you go. I think we're pretty set, except there's no sealant, but we're going to get to that in a second. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that this seemed to work surprisingly well, right? This technique is pretty darn easy, especially if you have an air compressor. Maybe one thing I do want to point out is, you know, there are air compressor attachments that people will sell you so that you can adapt, say, Schrader to Presta valves. Like, for example, I've got one of these little components right here. This is a Presta to Schrader adapter. You could try to use that, but I actually don't need that. This, you saw, it inflated and seated with about 20 psi, so not a whole lot. So what I end up using is I just take out the valve core, as you saw, and I just have this little adapter on the end of my air compressor, and it's really not much. It just kind of provides a little nozzle. You just jam that in there, hit it, and it seemed to work no problem. Okay, so this would almost be perfect, except now there's no sealant inside. So now the next thing we got to do is let's add the sealant to the inside, but we're going to leave both beads. The beads are seated, so we don't need to do anything. So let's come here, release the air, and we are going to put the sealant in through the valve stem. All right, so let's use our handy little valve core removal tool to get the valve core out. And again, I'm just gonna be a little bit careful to make sure I don't mess with the two beads because they're nice and seated. But let's take the valve core out. Okay, all right. And now what we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna wanna inject the sealant. So let's take the sealant, and again, you gotta make sure you shake this thing up real good. And what we're gonna use is half of this bottle. So actually maybe what we should do is let's mark about halfway on this bottle so I know how much to put in as we're dumping. Because what we're gonna use is, again, they provide this nice handy dandy little tube that will attach to this end, and we can basically just squirt this in through the valve stem. So that's the next step. All right, so we'll just thread that on, and then we should have to be a little careful here. This vinyl tube will go right over the stem, theoretically. Okay, there we go. Okay, it's on. Now, let's just turn this upside down. There we go, and start injecting away. Okay, so I think we got it, so I'll take off the bottle, and now let's put our valve core back in. And actually, maybe what you might want to do is clean this out a skosh before we do this, so hopefully the valve core doesn't get as gummed up. But see, they actually provide a nice little tool for that, so you can kind of just poke this in a couple of times. I'm just going to make sure that it's kind of roughly clear. Okay, that's good, that's good. I'll put the valve core back in, and we're getting pretty close. So I actually will tighten this guy down using my handy dandy valve core tool if I could find it. I seem to have lost it. Okay, and then let's pump this back up and make sure it, oh, here's the valve core tool. Okay, here it is. So let's just go ahead, tighten in the valve core a skosh. All right. Great. Okay, and now let's get our floor pump back and pump him up a little bit just to make sure everything is seated nicely. Okay, I'm not going to pump it up all the way because now what we want to do is roll this around so we can get the sealant all around the inside of the tire. Just kind of go and do kind of a little bit of a wiggling dance just to make sure that the sealant travels all around the interior of the tire. Okay, in fact, probably what we're going to want to do is go put this back on the bike and ride around in a bit, but this I think is probably a good test to just distribute the sealant as much as we can. Okay, great. Then I'm going to pump this back up to my desired pressure, and then I think we're off to the races. All right, so I think we got it. So now let's just rinse and repeat for the other tire. All right, so I've gone ahead and done the exact same thing for the front tire, and now I've mounted both of them back on the bike, and actually I've been riding around like this now for the entire season. I've actually put a few hundred miles on this over maybe the course of 20 or 30 rides, and absolutely no problems. I really love the tubeless system. It's worked well, and this installation process and conversion process has been fairly painless, and like I said, it's performed flawlessly so far. A couple of things to note. One, I think if I were to do this again, notice that you probably don't need to use that technique of using the inner tube to try to seat both of the beads. I think that technique works well if you have a stubborn set of tires where it is difficult to seat the beads, but for these, it was actually really easy to just use the compressor. In fact, that's what I did for my front tire. I didn't even bother using an inner tube in the front. I actually just slapped the tire on and then shot it with the air compressor, and both beads seated perfectly, no problem, the very first time. So it's fairly easy to do. The other thing to note, and I know a lot of people are always talking about this, do you actually save any weight when you're converting from tubes to tubeless? So remember earlier in the video, we weighed how much stuff we took out of one tire. That was the old inner tube and all of the old rim tape. And remember, that was 243 grams for one tire. Now, I also weighed all the components that went into the conversion. So that is all of the sealant that I put into one tire. So for one tire, that took 115 grams of sealant. And then we also had to add the valve stem, the valve core, the O-ring, that little nut, you know, that kind of stuff. That was just another 5 grams. And then all of the rim tape that we added. And remember, in our situation, we actually did a double layer. So that was only, but it was still only 7 grams, right? So for one tire in a tubeless configuration, that's only 127 grams. So if you compare that with the previous measurement of 243 grams, we are actually saving 116 grams per tire when you make this conversion. So for both tires, the overall bike, it actually weighs 232 grams less than it did beforehand. So you definitely save some weight. And you know, you might say 200 grams is, you know, that's pretty trivial, right? But actually, you know, that's something like an entire multi-tool, right? This is my Crank Brothers multi-tool that I carry around, and this is a little bit less than 240 or 232 grams. So it's non-trivial, right? And it is a great conversion. So I guess I don't know why you wouldn't do a tubeless setup. So if you can, it's fairly easy. It just takes a few hours to do the conversion process, and it has served me perfectly over the past season. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if so, I also hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. Surprisingly, if you just scroll a little ways down and click on that subscribe button, it really does help me continue making these videos. And remember, the new videos come out every Monday, so we will have more mountain biking and other associated videos in the future. In fact, there's already a few on the channel. You can actually access all of those via the playlist at the bottom of this video. So like I said, I think this is probably a great spot to leave it. I hope to be able to catch you at a future discussion where we can all learn something new together. So until then, I think I'll sign off. Talk to you later. Bye.